Good evening. My name is Serakalala, the National Chairperson of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azani. We are on the party school of the NNLC Youth League. We appreciate to be hosted by the Ngwane National Liberatory Congress. With that note, before we go further, today we'll be dealing with quite an interesting issue to look at the impacts of the Ukrainian crisis to Africa and what will be the impact for us, and see how things come together. May we then just hand over to the National Chairperson of the NNLC to welcome us. Over to you, Comrade Tlajwayo.
Izwe lethu National Chairperson sibonge onke macabana la khona lengena siyathemba ukuthi uNkulunkulu utoba nathi sikhone ukuthi umsebenzi uhambe kahle namuhla. Sibonga kakhulu kwena ukuthi leli thuba usinikedile ukuthi naku emacabana aphelele lawa la khona lengena. I-topic lesingena ngayo lana i-topic lesithinzayo ngoba i-topic ye-food security kakhulu lokungiyona lesingeke sikhone ukusurvive ngaphandle kwayo. Siphinde futhi sibuke ukuthi sitawubuka indzaba ya oil. Siyacabanga ukuthi sitawulideka kahle. Siyabonga ama-comrades. Thank you very much, Comrade Caba.
Thank you very much, National Chair. Today we got a special guest. We work together as the youth in our time, National Chair. It's Victor Serakalala. At that time, he was serving as the Secretary for International Affairs. We are lucky that we are presenting someone whose politics goes over the years, but more importantly, this is international relations is an area of his academic specialty. He's a professional who has served in public sector and in civil society. Comrade Victor Serakalala will be taking us through this interesting phenomena. Over to you, Comrade Serakalala.
Thank you, Chairperson, and I wish to welcome everyone with protocol observed. I know there's a national chairperson of the Ngwane National Liberatory Congress, but I'm also aware that there are also distinguished leaders that are joining us today. And I thank you for the humble opportunity you have presented to me so that I could perhaps share my 2 cents understanding of the current topical issue in the world, that is the so-called Ukrainian crisis. It is called, I'm saying the so-called because it has got a huge history. This is actually based on the expansion of the NATO into areas that previously were occupied by the USSR. The USSR was led by Russia, and it is a division that occurred so sharply post-1945 after the Second World War, where we had a group that belonged to what was then called the Warsaw Pact, and a group that belonged to the NATO, Northern Atlantic Treaty Organization. These two groups fought what was then known as the Cold War. which upon the fall of the USSR in 1990, the then George Bush, the father to the president of America during the era of the 9/11, introduced a concept of the New World Order. This New World Order to America meant American expansion, expanding its influence throughout the entire world. It impacted on various activities in the world. Just to be specific, closer to where we are, it also affected the direction some liberation organizations followed post 1990. To be specific, in our country, the ruling party followed a new pattern of strategy that was aligning itself to the Western powers. I think by laying down this foundation, I want you to understand this as a NATO expansion. It is NATO expansion in the fact that look, I even forgot some names. Look, in 2014, a government that was led by the Democrats influenced the insurrection that took place in Ukraine so that they could appoint the current president, who is Vladimir Zelensky, to be the president of Ukraine, so as they may be able to pursue the fact that Ukraine must join NATO as an organization. By so doing, Russia viewed that stance as a national threat to Russia. And as a result, they then adopted a policy of a direct confrontation with Ukraine with a view to overthrow a government that was also installed by the United States, which is also supported by the United States. This crisis, that's how it came upon. We see all evidence that indicate that the Democrats in the United States were already in contact with Vladimir Zelensky since 2014 up until last year, 2021. To a large extent, if you were to think some of the contestation that were there during the American election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden was also the computer of Hunter Biden, who is the son of Joe Biden, whose computer was found with information that seeks to say he had contracts that he has entered with the government of Ukraine, and they were influencing the policy of Ukraine to their direction. And their direction is the persuasion of the expansion of Americanism in territories that were previously occupied by USSR. This challenge, it's not starting today. At some point when Cuba needed an association with the Russian government, the USA barred Russia from entering into relationship with Cuba because they were also raising the very same argument of their security, national security threats. So it shows that all these two countries, be they the Russians, be they the Americans, were actually interested in protecting their national interest security-wise. So, to the surprise of many, the USA was intending to support Ukraine to join NATO, and they were also prepared to build a nuclear power plant in Ukraine. And this was also expanding their the expansion of America, and also securing their national interest as a state. Well, I do not want to overemphasize exactly what is transpiring, because I think prior we could start with this meeting, I highlighted the fact that war is fought from numerous fronts, but the most important front of them all, it's the propaganda front. This is why you see the world is denied to have both sides of the story heard, the side of Russia and the side of the Americans. To date, we see in SADC in particular, I'll be specific, your multi-choice as a company that's providing your satellite channels in this part of the world has actually cancelled their contract with any media house that would be providing information which is contrary to the one pursued by the USA and their allies. And as a result, we find ourselves in a situation wherein we are fed with one channel of information, that which is supported by the United States of America. The war had started. As it was beginning, we always had our own views. We were aware that America is going to support or to fight side by side with Ukraine. We were also doubtful, some of us, that Russia will eventually invade Ukraine. However, Vladimir Putin has gone against the thinking of many and has done the unexpected. He's even threatening a nuclear usage at some point if things are to be tough. So far, we call it a war, but in actual fact, there is no war, because it is only Ukrainian that are destabilized. There's not even a single missile that's going to Russia. The war is fought in Ukraine. It's not affecting Russians physically. It may affect them through sanctions. But however, these sanctions or any form of attack that they are trying to do against Russia, it's further redefining the world. It's redefining the world in the sense that Russia is now challenging the American currency, which is the dollar. They are telling all countries that are buying their oil to say, if you want to purchase anything from us, you must purchase it from a ruble, which is their currency. They have also negotiated with countries such as your United Arab Emirates, your Saudi Arabia, that they must stop using dollar as the mode of exchange between countries that wants to buy oil. That is a war which is so economical in nature, and it also threatens Russia. That is why you see, I want to say it also threatens the USA, because anything that threatens the USA dollar touches the day-to-day living of the Americans, which is why you also see the divisions that are already starting in the USA. I'm sure you must have noticed that beginning of April, between April and May, and beginning of May, there was shortage of baby formula in the USA, and the opposition party, which is your Republicans, were accusing the Democrats of supporting the war in Ukraine at the expense of baby formula. It is so topical such that it even divides them as a nation. It divides them because the little resources that the USA is having in terms of its natural resources will have to be shared with countries that perhaps may not necessarily be able to fend for themselves. I'm referring to issues like your oil or energy supplies. It may be oil, it may be gas. Most countries that are allies of the USA are impacted. This is also creating a European crisis, because you can actually tell as we speak, food prices are rising. Anything that you can think of, it's inflated as we speak due to the nature of this war. Where does Africa stand, and where do we as the SADC stands on this, or on all these challenges? We are beset with a challenge that most governments that we have in Africa are actually led by stooges of other governments. We are either used by the East or by the West. If African countries are not stooges of the Chinese, they are stooges of the West. This denies us an opportunity to actually have what we call self-determination. And therefore, it also impacts on our self-reliance. I'll give you an example. In South Africa in particular, I'll give you a scenario with South Africa. We had Denel that was actually producing strong weapons. Your R4 would compete par to par with AK-47, which is produced by Russia. As we speak, most African countries are beset with security challenges because their weaponry were actually purchased from Russia, majority of them. Now Russia is at war in Ukraine, and it needs to produce as many weapons as possible in order to either defend or fight against the Ukrainians. It means they may not have enough weaponry that they will supply to Africa. But to the disadvantage of Africa, Denel, once upon a great company that was competing with world companies in production of weaponry, is also weak. So Azania, as we speak, is unable to occupy the position that was occupied by Russia before the war could start. Had we have been ready, we would have started a process of producing weapons locally that would be able to be distributed into the entire Africa for positive security matters. I do not mean for encouraging civil wars. for positive security measures. Now, we are beset with challenges that Africa is going to face a huge security challenge because of the war in Ukraine. The second part is the one that we spoke about, the question of supply of basic needs such as wheat and your sunflower oil, and also your crude oil for energy. We are, as African states, so dependent to external supply of such resources from both Ukraine and Russia. It's not only Ukraine, but it's both Ukraine and Russia. Such that Nigeria, for instance, despite the fact that they've got enough rain in Nigeria, but they get approximately 50% of their wheat from that part of the world. Now, if there's no supply, it means your price of bread will skyrocket not long. And you are aware that business is able to take prices a bit high, but even if a situation was to change tomorrow, those prices will never come down. So we are having a huge challenge as Africans because we were so dependent on foreign assistance in that respect to a level wherein, as it stands, we do not even know how to really self-rely on our own actions. Just to give you another example in the agriculture environment, the entire Africa is dependent on Russia for our manure, fertilizers. When North Korea was building the biggest plant of producing fertilizers, we thought perhaps they were not really thinking properly, some of us. But coming to think about it today, you realize that North Korea perhaps has got a torch. Their torch is so lit that they are showing us the way to say all countries that wants to self-determine and self-rely must build their own plants of fertilizers. Because if we are dependent on Russian fertilization of our crops, now that Russia is at war, they are in need of their fertilizers so that they could have food security during the era of this war. They may not necessarily be able to supply fertilizers to meet the needs of dependent states like most of African states. This brings us to the question, why and where should Africa go as it stands? Perhaps this war should have given us as Africans an opportunity to self-introspect, engage our scientific research bodies to start thinking on producing and manufacturing things in our own country. Assess the capacity and the strengths each African state has, what is it that Nigeria is capable of, which perhaps Azania is not? What is it that Azania is capable of, which perhaps DRC does not have? Because if we were to start assessing ourselves that way, we will then move into a proper integration which is informed by the strength of each African state. But unfortunately, as it stands, African leaders are watching the war like newspaper readers who do not necessarily analyze and come up with proper solutions. It is incumbent upon liberation movements, upon Africa, to provide leadership. It may not necessarily be a kind of leadership that attacks your presidents or your leadership of the state, because most of them are not necessarily leaders but puppets. But it calls upon liberation movements to initiate programs where possible of starting to engender the theory of manufacturing, the theory of agricultural development amongst our communities. Because as and when the resources are becoming scarce internationally, the most people that are going to be affected are our rural poor people, because they have been denied the opportunity to skill themselves for self-sufficiency and for subsistence. I know for a fact that perhaps it is not the right time to preach the gospel of subsistence, but if we do not start now, Africa is likely to face a starvation crisis, because in the midst of the contest of the currency of both Europe and Russia, African currencies are going to struggle even much further. It means the kind of capital that we may be having in terms of money that we may want to purchase food, basic food requirements, may not necessarily be able to meet our needs. It requires that liberation movements must start educating our people on the very basic skills that are required, food production. Because as it stands, the more things change, the more they stay the same. We are likely to face a crisis of food security in Africa. We are likely to face a crisis of national security in Africa. We are likely to face the challenge of invasion by the powers that be, because we have history on our side that as and when they fight, their decision would be to woo weaker states to join their wars. And in a war, those that are defeated, they are captured. And unfortunately, with Africa, like it happened post-1945, it happened in 1920 after the formation of the League of Nations, that African states were shared amongst countries that have won. Some states were colonies of Germany, and they were taken to Germany. Some were given to Portugal. Some were given to other European countries. And yet, again, we are faced with a huge challenge of being invaded, be captured, be recolonized, and be used as slaves again, because we will not have prepared ourselves. Now, which is why I want to make a clarion call to say all liberation movements in Africa need to really go back to the basics, teach our people what is it that we can do in case of emergency, because we are approaching a catastrophic circumstance that may lead into poorer countries suffering more than we expect. This perhaps may require that instead of being antagonistic to the ruling party, we must also use the lobbying tactics, because in a crisis situation, sometimes crises can be solved through lobbying. I'm not saying a direct confrontation with ruling parties in Africa may not necessarily help, but we need to measure our strengths and see what is it that we can achieve. If perhaps we are weak, as most liberation organizations today, the liberation movement has been weakened, perhaps we need to sit down and come up with negotiating tactics, impact on national policy framework of our various countries towards empowering our people for self-reliance on the basis of their basic subsistence in whatever format. Chairperson, am I still having some minutes?
Yes,
Hello?
you still have some minutes.
Now, one area that I wanted to delve into with regard to this crisis, it is such that the hostility that exists is so clear that in one way or the other, some African states are going to be forced to take sides. They are going to be forced to take sides, and this force that would be forcing them to take sides will come in various methods. Let me give you a scenario like it is happening in Tanzania today. You will be shocked that 2 weeks back, the FBI, which is another security wing of the United States of America, released a report that shows that an international company called Glencore has bribed politicians and the judiciary personnel. And in the process, they also said some African countries were also affected. That is the FBI. They did not mention Tanzania as a country. Well, they made mention of what they did in Nigeria, what they did in other countries. But to show you how this war is going to affect us, immediately, a week after that, a crime that was not reported by the president is reported. And this crime involves the United States dollars. Now, if you know them, the USA, they do not have mess with their dollar. They don't want any person to play with their dollar. Now, if their dollars are mentioned with millions that are not accounted for in a country where, in a country of that dollar's destiny, it is a cause for concern. Americans have invested a lot in their security. Now, when you see them being quiet when their millions are here, you must know that even here we may be dealing with a CIA intelligence that intends to destabilize Tanzania because of the international stance of our country in relation to the war. Remember, the USA wanted South Africa to make a pronouncement against Russia. Initially, the ministry responsible for foreign affairs, which is international relations in our country, made a pronouncement, and that pronouncement was corrected by the president. This will not have pleased Americans. And it may be that even the current circumstances, political circumstances surrounding our president, may be as a result of our comments in relation to Russia, because they want South Africa to condemn Russia, and South Africa has not done so. Because it has not done so, therefore, there must be a regime change, which is why this case is covered internationally. If you were to check, BBC covered it, and they are following the story dearly. This tells you the kind of strategies superpowers are employing against subordinate powers. You see, when you've got superpowers, then you must also have subordinate powers. We are subordinate powers as African states because we haven't as yet developed ourselves to match the superpowers pound to pound, which is why I am saying this war is likely to redefine the international relations, and is likely to redefine power relations. It is unfortunate that even when they are redefined, we will still be at the tail end. We will still be dependent on the winner for us to pursue interests of our nation as an African nation. I think after laboring this point, Chairperson, I'll hand the stage back to yourself for questions and clarifications.
Thank you very much, Comrade Serakalala. We will then open for questions. While the questions are still being thought through and refinement is happening in the head, I would just like to ask this question, that why the East is likely to fall together, particularly China and Russia, and is it likely that we are facing a long haul in terms of that relations? Because US was already focusing on China. Russia has just become an afterthought. Their main target, they continuously say China is their arch rival now.
Okay, thanks, Chairperson. In the world of politics, what we read may not necessarily be what is accurate, because China, in as much as US sees it as a threat, but it is still really dependent mainly on USA, because most of USA products are manufactured in China, basically because of cheap labor. But their main threat has always been Russia, which is why in their expansion policies, they are expanding in territories that are closer to Russia. Because remember, Russia contributed immensely during the First and the Second World War. China was nowhere to be seen in those wars. And as a result, in terms of security, Russia becomes the main target of the USA because they know its capability. Whereas with China, they sort of know what China can do but not as much as they can with Russia, which is why you see in terms of their expansion of NATO, they always want to go to all countries that are closer to Russia. Poland was the first one to join. Of recent, if my memory serves me well, they are okay. Sweden was it's one of the countries that Russia has also challenged that should it join NATO, it's going to face the very same attack Ukraine is facing. However, in China, what they are doing is, because China wants to occupy Taiwan, and Russia knows that China wants Taiwan. And as a result, their friendship is basically informed by their national needs, both nations. It is not that there's a realignment of the East. It is just that because China managed in the process of its development to develop a nuclear capacity, it has been accepted into the G8. Remember, the G8 was the G7 before China. Then after China's development of its nuclear capacity, it then joined the G8. But to this day, no one is so sure about China's capabilities of nuclear capacity. Whereas with Russia, they are quite aware that Russia is capable. Now, in the media, in the mainline, what they are doing is they are challenging Russia through going to countries that are closer to them, so that if they attack Chinese, Russia perhaps will be weakened. But again, what is of utmost important is that their main target is Russia. China knows that if America or if Western powers were to withdraw their manufacturing of goods in China, that country may collapse. Its economy may collapse because it's solely dependent on cheap labor when it comes to dealing with manufacturing of equipments. And in most cases, they get prototype, and what they are doing is reproduction, but the design is mainly designed in other countries. I'm not so sure whether I'm making sense, Chair.
You are making sense. I don't see any hand yet. Let's get closer home. With this iron curtain coming back, we know that in a unipolar world, we had a situation where you only have to get permission from the West and headquarters in Washington for you to liberate yourself or to make any moves against any regime. So with the conflict we have Eswatini, what does it mean, this change to a multipolar world, a multi-currency world, a multi-reserve currency world, and the likes? Thank you.
Let's perhaps ask ourselves what, because a unipolar world has not yet existed, even amongst the so-called allies themselves. You would agree with me that every nation wanted to protect, perhaps let's give an example with the currency. The British, because America was their colony, they still do not allow the American dollar to be above the British pound. And as a result, they that is why you saw even the conflict that existed in the European Union, which led to the Brexit. This was the protection of the British pound, because the British pound was nearly usurped by euro, and Britain would not have allowed euro to destroy the British pound, because Britain sees herself as superior to all other states in Europe. Yet you would agree with me, you are aware that there's always a historical contest between the French and the British power in Europe. So the dream of a unipolar world was always the dream of the United States. They've pursued it in various ways. They've pursued it in centralizing the World Bank, the IMF headquarters in their own locality. What is of an advantage to them is that America has got a very good, the USA countries in most cases, they've got a very good natural advantage in terms of natural resources, because believe you me, they've got their own oil, they've got enough water, they've got rain. That is why even in terms of their transport systems, they do have water transport that is serving as a public transport. It is because they are able to, they've got an advantage of nature. Some African countries also do have. It is just that we have not utilized that capacity to the latter. With African countries like ours, Azania and Swaziland in particular, the impact that's going to be on us would be who amongst the two superpowers would galvanize more resources and be able to control us. I'm saying and be able to control us, because I can assure you, if Russia is to make some strides into the war such that it weakens the American economy, Russia will start dictating terms on what African countries should do and should not do. Like it stands, in Azania, you do not have a diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, and yet in Swaziland, you do have one. That speaks to the kind of influence our controllers have over us. As we speak, Taiwan and Swaziland are related because the king is so closely protected by the British authority more than African people themselves, which is why I'm saying the impact would not be that much of a significance, except that power relations would have changed internationally and will be dictated upon by another colonizer. That's the most unfortunate part of it, because we have not developed our capacity to self-rely.
Comrade Dlamini, over to you.
Yes, thanks, my leader, and we are fortunate to have got Comrade Victor to facilitate in this important topic. I got lost a bit, and then I reconnected, but I'm happy he at some point he touched on the fact that there's actually no war between the two countries, because it is actually only the Ukrainians that are being destabilized. And he also mentioned that the war is normally fought even using propaganda. And we have been hearing that the Russians were maintaining that they are not at war with Ukraine, but they were engaged in a military operation. It's just a comment on that. But I have got a specific question. Because the Americans and the other European countries are well aware that Russia is capable militarily to face any superpower because of the military of the weapons that she has. Now, what is the impact of this in as far as the time that this war may take? Because the fact that Russia informed her nuclear part to actually stay alert for a nuclear operation, it tells you how determined are they in destroying everything in Ukraine. And the Americans and the Europeans are really afraid, I would say, in my own analysis. But as there is that polarity, the war will go on and on. And as the war goes on and on, our atrocities, our challenges, our problems in this part of the world, in Africa to be specific, are going to be more pronounced. And we are going to stay with such challenges for a good many years to come. So I am asking to say, what is the implication of this kind of a standoff, this kind of an indecisiveness, and the war is not ending anytime soon? What could be the future? What can we say about the future of everything, of the war itself, the future of the problems that we're facing, because it is already hitting hard on us with escalating fuel costs and all other, and cost of all other goods and services and all that, and utilities. It's really taxing on us. What can Comrade Victor say on that and its impact on our lives going forward?
Look, there's two scenarios. The war, if you remember, it started during winter. And basically, this is because Putin had thought European countries would not endure winter because they will need more of their gas, because they are dependent on Russians for gas and other energy substances. Now, the war is approaching summer. The crises that were anticipated by Russia at that time may not necessarily exist in summer, because the usage of this energy-driven equipment, such as your gas equipment, during summer are not utilized that much. Now, what we are going to see is a bit of a relief from the Europeans, because that pressure would have eased a little bit. And perhaps we anticipate they may intend sending their troops in Ukraine to go and help. However, should this war persist up until the next winter, then there's going to be a huge crisis in Europe, and that may lead into uprising, because the people on the ground may not necessarily be tolerant with the standoffs that is existing, because it will start to impact on their lives directly. Currently, a lot of people are starting to feel, but the impact of war has not yet been felt. Its magnitude has not yet been felt by many. For instance, in South Africa, in as much as we are saying fuel is expensive, in as much as we are saying bread is going to be expensive, the prices have gone high, but they are not yet really impacting a number of people to a level of unaffordability. People are still eating, People are still going to work, but we may reach a stage where these prices are such that they are unbearable. And here we are going to see a number of uprisings in a number of countries. Now, these countries will be forced to deal with both internal and external pressures, because internally, people will be up in arms. Externally, Russia will be on their case. So Putin may end up winning this war based on that. However, should European countries make a resolution that they want to see the end of the Russian government during this summer, possibilities are high that they may deploy their troops. And there, we are not so sure of the direction the war may take. But should it prolong to next winter in Europe, you can rest assured that European countries and the United States, they are going to have a serious challenge. Now, what does that have to do with us as Africans? I've already alluded to the fact that we are dependent on them on a number of areas. We are dependent on them on communication tools, fuel, food production, our day-to-day operation, even the kind of network that we're using currently, me and you. It is a network which is Western driven. So should the West have a crisis of that magnitude, this is going to impact negatively and severely on us, because even simple things that we think of, you may find that they are no longer easy to be accessed. We do not have, our internet, your www, it must first go to Western countries and then come back to Africa. Even as we speak, you may find that me and you, we are speaking, but the very network that we are using is connected through Western powers. Now, when they are in that crisis, you may expect a lot of mismanagement of such, and as a result, we may face an unprecedented challenge that has never been seen. It may lead into the kind of human catastrophe that our generation has never seen. And perhaps this may be as a result of the intention of some powers that be, which requires a population reduction worldwide.
Thank you very much. Yes, we are still online. Just checking any last question before we go towards closure.
Good afternoon, Comrade Victor.
Good afternoon.
Yes. Through you, Comrade Chair, my interest will go on the issue of NATO and the United Nations' interest in trying to deal with the war and failing as a power bloc that should be leading us out of it. And the failures of NATO to be able to put a reaction to this war. Instead, we see it trying to gain more members within the European countries, but having Turkey declining those members in the interest of supporting its power play with Russia. And one is looking at the issue that Russia would be interested in using Turkey to give supplies to Africa. I think in the current deal that we're seeing being done by African leaders. And the Western countries seem to complain on the deal. My issue is how does it assist us as Pan-Africanists to be solely dependent on the network of both West and East without establishing our own. I think if we look at our infrastructure, we can't even deal with our own airspace and the sea that are key in terms of delivering our needs in both continents. I think I'll end there. Thank you.
One principle Pan-Africanism continue to emphasize is that we do not want to exchange one colonial master to another colonial master. Which is why I'm saying the effect that Africa is feeling today, it is as a result of a lack of governments that are led by Pan-Africanists. Because what we are seeing is the continuation of dependency and creating animosity unnecessarily with other states. In our intention to be self-sufficient, self-reliant, and self-determining, we need not create unnecessary enemies. If there's an animosity built between us and the Americans due to the fact that one superpower wants to work with us, well, it is their choice. We cannot make a choice for them, but it is also the weakness of African states to actually self-govern. As it stands, from time immemorial, from my youth days, I hear African people calling foreign investments time and again, but they do not actually explain what do they want from foreign investments. So they are giving them a blank check to say, come and make profit in Africa, but they are not really, the investments are not defined. Because when you want someone to come and invest in your country, you want them to invest into a project that you know. It is just that on your own, you are unable to do it. That is called investment, because investments needs to benefit us. So when you call foreign investment, it must be that you have already defined your destiny. Now, the unfortunate part of it is that African states have not defined their destiny. And as a result, they invite foreigners to come and chart a way forward for them. No states will ever chart a developmental framework for another state, because there's a principle that says in international relations, states do not have friends but interests. Now, that statement is so true. When you see Chinese sending her people in our countries, you must know that their interest is to secure or safeguard the national interest, their national interest. Because in so doing, they will be able to grow their economy, secure the livelihood of their people at the expense of resources that they may have acquired from their dependent states. That is why I'm saying, perhaps as Pan-Africanists, there is a need to start engaging into community work, engage into community work where we are teaching our people tactics and methods of self-reliance, methods of subsistence. I'm saying subsistence because as it stands, most communities are not ready for commercial production, be it commercial farming, manufacturing. So we need to first teach them skills of subsisting. Beyond subsisting, they will then grow themselves into becoming commercial entities. But as it stands, it is a painful reality that Africa is not ready for circumstances that are going to be presented by any of the scenarios that I have painted on the above.
Comrade Serakalala, thank you very much for giving us such a wider perspective. It's really a big statement that we are not ready for any of the outcomes of the current development. Just as my closing question, as after your response, I will hand over to the National Chair, Hlajwayo. Trump has said a very interesting statement that be careful what you wish for. When Germany was confirming that it's reinvesting in its army and it's going back to have a full army as it used to be. What is your take on that from inside NATO perspective?
Look, there are serious fragmentations within NATO itself. I think I highlighted on the above that United States is blessed with resources. They've got oil. They've got most of what European countries want from Russia. America does not really need them, which is why Germany, it's starting to realize, because Germany is the main country which is dependent on the Russian gas. Now, if it is to be dictated upon by a USA which is self-reliant, when it is so dependent, German nationals may not necessarily be so well comfortable with that state of affairs. And that is why I'm saying, if by any chance this war progress up until winter next year, we are likely to see developments that we never anticipated. This may even lead to NATO breaking away, because some countries would naturally want to buy natural resources that Russia have, which they do not have. And America does not want them to do so, and yet they do not supply them with natural oil and gases that they have. Remember, Trump wanted to build a pipe that would transport oil from Canada. Okay, I don't want to, let me not mention this point, because I'm not so sure about the destinations. But the gist of the point I want to raise is, he wanted to create a scenario where the USA would be able to supply European countries with all that Russia was supplying, which the USA has. And yet, because of the diversions that the Democrats and the Republicans are having, Biden has got a different view, because Biden wants a clean energy. He's an advocate of a clean energy. He's an environmentalist, which Trump is not. Now, in the process, because they are fighting over what kind of energy should be used on the or in the planet Earth, between the Republicans and the Democrats, some are aligned to the provision of oil to European countries, and others are not. So, should Germany recruit, reorganize, the German nationalism is going to be strengthened, and it may lead into the resurgence of the Nazi, which is what the world does not anticipate. And that is why Trump is warning us against the reunification of Germany and the strengthening of the German army. Germany has since noticed that since the World War II, it has been weakened and it is no longer a country of note. Now, if you are interested in becoming a nation, an independent nation, your entire planning must be based from national security.
Thank you very much, Comrade Lajoy. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Victor, and thank you very much for hosting us, National Chairperson, and thank you to all the leaders and members in the Youth League for keeping on the planning that the challenges that we are facing today are shaping our future. Africa shall unite.
Is with it.
Africa.
Africa.